Well, interestingly enough, and I'd ask you to comment on this, still during the 1820s, Indian tribes in Illinois and along the Mississippi tended, or still would go once a year, first to Drummond Island in Michigan and then later to Malden to receive presents. And I've suspected, and you might know more about this, is a scholar of the Black Hawk War, to what degree the expectation of this continuing link with the British might have encouraged Black Hawk in his really hopeless gesture in 1832.
Well, he thought it was coming. He believed in that. He also thought the profit would help. And he thought all sorts of help would be coming, and it did not materialize.
Well, his band of Sauk Indians, who was a subdivision of the tribe, was known as the British Band.
Right.
And so while they may have realized that they couldn't use the Indians anymore, they still continued to encourage their hopes to some extent, either voluntarily or involuntarily.
I don't quite see it that way. I don't know a lot about their post-war relationship, but I know they were told in no uncertain terms, don't come back. When they showed up at certain British camps after the war, they said, look, this war is over, our relationship with you is over, you live in the United States. Now, there may have been agents in the field who did continue to cultivate the Indian allies, but I think it was mainly, I would say, a case of wishful thinking on the part of those Indians who thought they were going to get help from the British.
I was going to put this in, the time is running out for this, but I just wanted to say someone else who made the role that person was in, Henry Clay, the speaker, was Dolly Madison. Nice. Made the First Lady role at the same time, did she not? Staying over from Jefferson and kind of staying in the administrations.
She all but invented the role of the First Lady. First as Jefferson's hostess, because he was a widow, and then later, especially after her husband became president in 1809. Right. She turned the White House, the executive mansion, into the social center of Washington. And that was about the best they could do in Washington. There was still a lot of grumbling. This was not Philadelphia. And a lot of those people remembered Philadelphia when it was the capital in the 1790s. And we came very close to voting to move back to Philadelphia after the public buildings were burned in Washington. But of course, ultimately, we didn't do that.
I want to remind everyone who is watching that we do have, in honor of this war, on our website, AbrahamLincolnBookshop.com, that we have an 1812 bookshelf. And a lot of interesting books. You can see it, some of them back of you over there. And if you go into the rare and used book section, you'll see that. And you might like to see what there is out there. This is only a small portion of it, but some good books, including Len Tucker's, which I like, and that comes from my own home shelf, the one that's up there. Gorgeous book dust jackets. I want to briefly, we don't have the time to really get into this, and let people get into the books and read about all this. Two things we really haven't spoken about. One, the war at sea. I understand that was a large part of this war. And the Constitution came out of this. Don't give up the ship came out of this. Old Ironsides came out of this. The Star-Spangled Banner came a bit from, at least from the water. So briefly, tell us where the War of the Sea took place. I know in the Great Lakes right here and the eastern seaboard. Briefly, what it meant to the war.
Well, there were two dimensions of the naval war. There were three inland naval battles, one on Lake Erie and one on Lake Champlain. We won both of those battles, and they led to significant land victories as well. We lost the Battle of Lake Bourne on the Gulf Coast, but even that loss probably bought Jackson a little more time to prepare his defenses against the advancing British. On the high seas, our frigates were heavy frigates. They were much more powerful than the British frigates and performed very well in the first couple of years of the war. In fact, we won the first 5 victories, 3 by frigates. This stunned the British. They were not accustomed to losing single-ship duels on the high seas. It helped create the reputation of the USS Constitution and gave it its nickname, Old Ironsides, because the hull timbers were so thick, some of the British round shot bounced off. And after the first battle against the Guerriere, one of the seamen was heard to exclaim, "Huzzay! Her sides are made of iron." That led to Ironsides and very quickly became Old Ironsides. But the preeminent use of naval power on the high seas during the war was in these single ship duels. They were largely insignificant strategically. It was rather the British imposition of a blockade on the Atlantic and Gulf Coast, which shut down American trade and very nearly bankrupted the U.S. government because it got its revenue by taxing trade.
Now, the other subject we should get to a little bit here, at least, is what we started out with, and that's Fort Dearborn. We have a number of streets named after people involved, Wells Street, Kinsey. Kinsey was an interesting character, to say the least. And, of course, the Captain Samuel Wells, who was an old Indian fighter, and he was killed in the battle. We call it a massacre. And really have to get into that long chapter that you have in your book to really get all the intrigue and infighting. I was surprised at all that. I didn't know that. That took place in that fort, and how the whole alleged massacre came out. Should we still be calling this a massacre?
Well, I think when we start calling the St. Valentine's Day Massacre the Battle of St. Valentine's Day, we can change this as well. There was a it meets any definition of massacre that I'm aware of. There was a preponderance of force on one side. And the use of force continued well beyond any actual military need for it. So I think it's an appropriate term. It is not. It is not untrue. The Indians did have remarkable grievances, and they were treated in some ways very callously. Though the Potawatomi, who were fighting for, quote, their homes here in the Northeast, were relatively recent newcomers, had forced their way in by violence, by killing the previous occupants within a generation or two prior to this time. So while it is certainly true that they were treated callously and had grievances, it's also possible, on the other hand, to exaggerate them. The garrison of the fort was leaving. They are on a obviously peaceful mission. They are not. The country was not, at least didn't know it was at war with the Potawatomi. They'd been at least tacitly offered safe conduct. They were leaving. They were posing no military threat at all. It's a train heavily encumbered with civilian males, women, and children. 12 of the children were killed in the massacre. Others afterwards died in captivity. The soldiers ultimately, after a short fight, surrendered under promise of safe conduct, but that didn't prevent up to 7 of their number being killed that particular day. Others perished in captivity afterwards. So it was a gruesome event, and is one that I think has to be obviously kept in the larger perspective. But to say that the fact that the Indians had grievances doesn't, and therefore were in a sense able to justifiably kill anyone on their turf, is sort of the Chicago gang mentality, actually, and not, I think, a justification for what was really a mass murder.
When all of this, Detroit fell and Dearborn fell and fort after fort was falling out here, what did this country think about this? Did they think, oh my gosh, we could be in mortal danger, and all of a sudden over the Appalachians we're going to see the hordes come?
Well, that's where those naval victories helped out. Gave a boost to sagging American morale after the disastrous campaigns of 1812.
One of my favorite events of the war, I don't know, it's probably got to rank high among yours, is the surrender of Fort Mackinac, or Fort Michilimackinac at Mackinac Island in Michigan. It was staring across the straits at a British force on St. Joseph's Island. It was, in fact, the most exposed, most frontline post in the Northwest. And the Madison administration and General Hull in Detroit simply forgot to inform the commander that our country had declared war on Britain. And the first he found out was that he woke up one morning to find British artillery being placed on a hill commanding his fort, and about 500 Indians outside shouting, shouting for blood. And he said in his report, honestly, this was the first news I had that the country was at war. He did the sensible thing and surrendered, and one of the British leaders said that had he not, that not a person in the fort would have escaped. But unlucky to the last, he went to Detroit, where he requested a court-martial inquiry into his conduct, and was killed by a British cannonball lobbed into the room where the court-martial was proceeding. Unlucky to the last. One of the very few casualties in Detroit, I
Yeah,
assume.
yeah. That, by the way, that story about the fall of Mackinac, the news of war spread at a very different rate and on both sides of the border. It generally moved a little faster through Canada than it did through the United States. And so often the British got word first. But, geez, in Great Britain, we declared war on June 18th, 1812. They didn't get word of it until July 30th. Typically, it took 6 to 8 weeks for news to spread across the Atlantic. And this brings up another point. The British, we declared war on June 18th. 5 days later, the British announced a repeal of the Orders in Council. Well, we didn't get that news until August. If we'd had that news, undoubtedly we would not have declared war.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the vagaries of non-technology.
Yes.
I'm going to put both of you, all three of you, to work, actually, signing these, and we'll have some others for you to sign as well. There are numbers of people who have bought books before. We appreciate that they have. I'm not going to name everyone right now since we're so far along here in time, but the Smith family from Longwood, Florida, does want to say to Don and Connie that they took the 1812 themed History America tour with you on the St. Lawrence and want to say hello. You're going to be signing a book to them. So if you'll start to here, if you need pens are there. And I'm going to let you know out there in Webland of our upcoming schedule. On Thursday, September 27th, that's our next one, is going to be James McPherson. We've told you about that, the War on the Waters. He's going to be here on Thursday night. On Friday, September 28th, the next day at the Union League Club and the Pritzker Military Library in the afternoon and then the evening. And then Saturday at the Civil War Museum in Kenosha. That's Saturday, September 29th. So September 27th, 8th, and 9th, James McPherson will be talking about his wonderful work, War on the Waters. October 5th, very quickly afterwards, on a Friday at 6 p.m., we're changing away from some of our usual Thursday nights and Saturday noons, but Richard Slotkin is going to be in, and this is an interesting book, The Long Road to Antietam. September is Antietam. So this is going to be one I think everyone is going to want to also listen to and get a first edition as well. On December 6th, a Thursday, we're going to have a Pulitzer Prize winner, John Meacham, come in for his Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power. He won his Pulitzer for The American Lion, Andrew Jackson, in the White House. So we have a good lineup in the next one, and so watch our website and you'll see when they come. Watch your spam so they don't go into spam, and watch that virtual book signing is coming up to you. I want to thank our authors today for being in here. These are books that touch all of our country, actually, no matter where you are, almost. I guess west of the Mississippi, except for St. Louis, I can't say that much, but you all came from the east. This is one of the few wars that was inside our borders. And so that's for itself is not as known as the Civil War, not as known as the Revolutionary War. You're going to find some interesting things and people in here who dominated, by the way, the rest into the middle of the 19th century. So, Gillum Ferguson, thank you for your Illinois in 1812, and the Raucous Red Glare with Don Hickey and Connie Clark. These are both wonderful works that we have and signed first for you. We want to thank Johns Hopkins Press and University of Illinois Press for bringing them to us. It's the publishers who are the unsung heroes for us, because they bring the publishers to us for these fine discussions. And remember, this will be on the archive as well. You may be seeing that at this point. It's the end. And I want to thank the staff of Abraham Lincoln Bookshop for putting this on. And all of you have come out on a beautiful day here in the waning days of summer to join us on Massacre Day, as we're saying. So thank you for being with us, and we'll see you at the end of September once again. Thank you.